Today we're going to talk about applying to master's MBA programs in the US. So my name is Céline Ouziel. I work for the Franco-American Commission in Paris, France. It's also called the Fulbright Commission. The Franco-American Commission has two missions. The first one is to administer the Fulbright program. But it's only for French citizens. However, I can talk to you about the Fulbright Scholarship, which is an international program. I will talk about it like for 2 minutes after this slide. And also I'm representing the EducationUSA network, and I will explain what EducationUSA is afterwards. So the Fulbright Scholarship, candidates for the Fulbright Scholarship should apply in their country of citizenship. And probably the person who are here, Yulia and Stepan, you probably got the information from your Fulbright Center or from the EducationUSA center in your country of residence. But if you don't know where to find the Fulbright Commission in your country, you have the website here, foreignfulbrightonline.org, and you will see if it's administered by a commission, by National Center, or maybe by the US Embassy. In each country, the conditions, the requirements to get the scholarship is very different, and the deadlines also are very different. Sometimes you need to apply just maybe 9 months in advance. In France, the application deadline is December 1st, and in some places you need to apply at least one year and a half in advance. So please contact the Fulbright administration in your country of residence and get all the information from them directly, because even application information is different. The Fulbright program has started at the end of the Second World War, right after the Second World War, and the idea is mutual understanding between the United States, between the people of the United States and the people of the rest of the world. It's a rather prestigious program, and it's generally very selective. So as to apply, it's a merit scholarship. So you really need to have good academic records and lots of work experience or internships and things like that. Also, you need to be aware of the 2-year home residency requirement. For example, if you're doing an MBA in the US, maybe you want to try to stay to get a job there, but if you get a Fulbright scholarship, unfortunately, you will not be able to stay for a work visa. So you really need to think about that. What do you want to do after your master's or your MBA? And if you want to come back to your country of residence, it's no problem if you get a Fulbright scholarship. But if you really want to try to work in the US, don't apply, because you will never be able to get an immigration visa or work visa. But there are other scholarships, of course, and I think Kavitha is going to talk about that later. So what is EducationUSA? EducationUSA is a network of about 400 centers, advising centers all around the world. There must be at least one EducationUSA advising center in each country when there is a US embassy. In France, there is one, it's just me. In other countries, there might be two or several. So check the EducationUSA website to locate the nearest EducationUSA advising center. We are the official guide to studying in the US. We are sponsored by the State Department, the US government. We are trained by the US government. We are supposed to be experts, so we know everything you need to know to apply to a US university, whatever the level of study or the subject. Today we're going to talk about masters, but I can also talk with undergraduate prospective students in any kind of fields of study. So here you have some kind of map of the US higher education system. You have two university cycles: undergraduate, which is right after secondary school, which generally lasts about 4 years. And we're not going to talk about that today, but just to be aware that so as to apply to a graduate program, you need to have the equivalent of an undergraduate degree. So in general, it's 4 years, but depending on each institution, sometimes they will accept a 3-year degree, but it's really case by case, so you need to contact the admissions office of each graduate program. At the master's level, you have the opportunity, the possibility to do several kinds of master's degree, or you can do research. You can do a PhD. And the length of the program really depends on the program itself. There are some masters which last like 1 year. MBAs in general are 2 years, but it depends on the school also. Some fine arts program can be 3 years, etc. PhDs are longer, so you really need to commit for at least, I would say, 4 or 5 years. But PhD is only for research. So if you want a professional degree, don't think about PhDs, of course. And at the graduate level, you also have medical schools and law schools. I don't know how it is in the Czech Republic or Moldova. In France, you start medical school and law school after secondary school, but in the US, you have to wait for 4 years before applying to medical and law schools. So at the graduate level, you have 2 kinds of master's degree. Master of Arts or Master of Science. Master of Arts are generally introduction to research, same thing with Master of Science, but of course in scientific subjects. And MBAs, MFA, LLM, for those who are interested in studying law at the master's level, are not supposed to be for a candidate who would like to pursue with a PhD. It's possible, but it's not natural. So MBA, MFA, LLM programs are terminal degrees. The idea is to finish with this degree. Okay, just a couple of things about what you can do apart from an MBA if you're interested in business. You can do a Master of Science in many subjects like finance, marketing, accounting, human resources, etc. And generally it's a 1-year program and it's more focused on this subject than in an MBA program. Then you have, it's rather recent, a certain number of institutions who offer a degree for students who are recent graduates, meaning they don't have professional experience. A lot of MBA requires at least 2 or 3 years of professional experience, but these kind of programs are open to recent graduates, so you don't really need to work after your first undergraduate degree. Then you have what we call certificate programs. Those are non-degree programs, so it does not replace at all an MBA or a master, but it can be a good way to spend some time in the US, to have some business classes, maybe to improve your English. And in some cases, after 9 months of academic training, you can do what we call a OPT, optional practical training, meaning an optional internship in a US company. So it's a good way for people who don't really have the academic records to get into a master's or MBA, or maybe for people who have a very low English level. And it can be, sometimes it can be also like a pre-MBA program, but it's not the equivalent of a master's or an MBA. So the application process, I know Kavitha is going to talk about that a little longer than I will do, but just a brief summary of what you need to think about when you're applying to a program in the US. First, be aware of deadlines. Deadlines are very different from institution to institution, but it can start from maybe December 1st to March or even later, according to the institution. So when you're choosing a program, be careful about deadlines because it can be very early. I don't know about Yale, but it's probably December or January. Yes, okay. Then you have to take a certain number of tests. There are generally 2 tests for international students. You have an English test. If you're a non-Anglophone student, you need to take either the TOEFL or the IELTS. And please check the website of each institution to check if they accept both TOEFL or IELTS, because sometimes they don't accept IELTS. And then the second test that you might have to take is either the GRE or the GMAT. So the GRE means Graduate Record Examination. It's a general test. It's testing your English, but it's a test that is aimed at Anglophone students. So it's made for American students. It's not like the TOEFL. So the level of English is very high. So there is a verbal part and a math part. So you need to be very good at math. The GRE is also required for Master of Arts programs. So you don't need to be very, you don't need to be an expert in math, but you still need some basics. Then for MBAs in general, they will require the GMAT, which is like the GRE. There's a verbal part and a math part, but the math part I think is probably more difficult. So you need to prepare. You need to do that several months in advance. You cannot get a good score if you don't prepare at least maybe 2 or 3 months before the application deadline, and even 3 months can, depending on your level. For me, it's too short. Then think about the rest of the application. You need to provide to each institution your transcripts, meaning your grades, from the first year of higher education. They don't care about secondary school. They want everything from the first year of higher education. If it's not written in English, you need to translate them with the help of an official translator. Then you need to provide reference letters, and Kavitha is going to talk about that. You need to write a personal statement. Again, Kavitha will explain to you how to, will give you some tips about that. And the last thing that each admissions office will require, not necessarily before the deadline, probably when you are admitted, they will require a financial certification. So a proof that you are able to pay at least for the first year of study, and it includes tuition fees, accommodation, housing, meals, and personal expenses. And generally the university will give you an estimate of how much one-year program costs. And then you have to provide with a letter from your bank or official document, but generally not before you are admitted. This is a compulsory for the visa. And I'm going to talk about the visa. So the visa is the last step after admission. You cannot apply for a visa if you were not admitted to a US university. So there are two kinds of visa for master's program. It's generally F1 if you're an independent student, a J1 if you're going through an exchange program. If you're doing an exchange program, for example, with your local school, or if you got a Fulbright scholarship, you have a J1 visa. I-20 DS 2019. This is just details. This is the certificate that each school needs to send you to us so that you can apply for your visa. But for the moment, you are at the beginning of you're only thinking about doing a master and MBA, so you don't really need to get details about the visa procedures. And you have a list of US Embassy on this on the following websites, and everything generally is explained on their websites. Okay, so I think that's my last slide, and let's turn to Kavitha.
Great, thank you, Céline, and thank you, EducationUSA, for hosting this today. I'm just really grateful to be here to talk about applying to business school in the United States. And my focus today will be the full-time program, but I'll certainly talk about various iterations of what graduate management study and what MBAs might look like across the spectrum as well. So first, I'm just going to start with a quick discussion about the value of a graduate degree. And there really are a few things that you should consider when you're thinking about pursuing study beyond the undergraduate or college level. First, do you need some advanced training for a profession? That's primarily the reason that many people decide to pursue a graduate degree. That kind of goes hand in hand with the second point I have up there, which is professional licensing requirements. So particularly in law and medicine, there may be a requirement for some additional graduate study in order to meet some licensing requirements. There's some increasing research that shows that what you've gained from the college degree and what the college degree prepares you to do in the workforce is equivalent to what you've gained from your secondary school education about 30 years ago. It's about the equivalent when employers think about your level of education now versus 30 years ago. And you can see that goes hand in hand with my next point there, which is the graduate degree now really equals what college equaled in the mind of employers about 30 years ago. So I'm going to go a bit into the MBA program, and I'm going to start by saying I'm the Deputy Director for Admissions at the Yale School of Management, but I will be talking broadly about the MBA in general and not just the Yale MBA. So there are a few reasons one should consider getting an MBA, and they have less to do with sort of what I referred to earlier around licensing requirements and sort of professional requirements of particular industries like medicine or law, and more about skills that will make you more marketable and interesting to potential employers, as well as other reasons. I'll go into a few of those there. First, hard skills. So what the MBA can really do for you is reinforce some of the key, what we call hard skills that will assist you in the future workplace that you're pursuing. So, for example, gaining some foundational knowledge in accounting, in finance, in marketing, and operations. All of these things are crucial to understanding how organizations work. And for that reason, many people decide to pursue an MBA just to really make sure that they have that strong foundation as they go into management positions within various companies and organizations. The next piece is really soft skills. So as a counterpart to that sort of foundational knowledge, the MBA can really provide you with a chance to think about, how do teams work? How do I work within a team? What is my particular leadership style? What are things I need to do to become a more effective leader? What do I need to do to become a more effective team leader? So being able to think in those ways, be able to present yourself in a certain way, these are all soft skills that you can gain through the MBA program. And that kind of goes hand in hand with what we call leadership training. And most MBA programs, the goal is to not just create managers coming out of the programs, but really leaders, future leaders in the organizations that MBA candidates will go into. And to that end, there's a lot of work that's done in MBA programs to help prepare you to think in a leadership way and to start approaching issues and problems from a leadership perspective. Some more personal reasons for wanting to do an MBA, perhaps you're interested in changing careers, so what I call a career pivot. You know, an MBA might be a good chance to take an academic, 2-year academic period to really think about that and help prepare yourself to move from one industry to another or one function to another. It may help you accelerate your career. So perhaps you've been you know, within a particular industry and have had a particular sort of training coming out of your college or undergraduate training, and perhaps the MBA is what you need to be promoted into a leadership or management area. And finally, a really strong MBA should be able to give you some career flexibility. So what that means is you should be able to, you know, potentially straddle a number of different industries because you are equipped with hard skills and soft skills to really be able to think about issues more broadly. You should be able to take what you've learned in one industry and apply it to another, and do the same if you're changing functions or perhaps even sectors. So perhaps you want to go between the private and the nonprofit and the public sectors. And a really strong MBA program should be able to allow you that career flexibility and the ability to be successful in those sectors. So in terms of what you want to think about when you're looking at MBA programs, you know, the key thing I talk about with applicants to our program is you first need to think about personal fit. So things like location, things like size, things like culture. Those are all really important, very personal decisions that you have to make about school. For example, if it's very important to you to be close to family and your family is located mainly in one region of the world, you know, maybe going to a US program doesn't make sense for you. However, if you're interested in pursuing education in the US and having a couple of years you know, being exposed to programs in the U.S., students from around the world, etc., you know, then that's something to consider. You know, other things to think about when thinking about location are, you know, how important is it to me to be in a big city? How important is it to be close to a city? How important is it to be in a smaller community? Those types of things may inform where you're looking at particular programs. You may also want to think about size of the program. For example, some of our applicants are very interested in attending a school with a small student body. They see many benefits to going to a school with a smaller program. However, you may wish to be in a larger program that may give you more opportunities for networking. So, you know, I would think about where you feel you would fit in best, how you learn the best. Would you benefit from a larger or smaller program? Culture kind of goes hand in hand with that as well. You know, I would spend a lot of time talking to current students and alumni if possible, and just get a sense for what your 2 years would be like in an MBA program. Is this someplace you want to spend time? And not only is it just those 2 years, once you graduate from the program, you really are a member of that school for life in terms of being part of an alumni community. So are these people that you want to be part of your network moving forward? So really thinking about culture and your own personal fit with that program is really important. Some other things to consider, just on the academic front, I always recommend that applicants look at things like faculty and pedagogy. So how does the school present its material? How do they teach material? And some schools are very focused on what we call a case-based method. Others are very focused on things like lecture formats and things like that. Perhaps you gravitate more towards one style of teaching or pedagogy than another. So those are things to look at because you do want to have an academic experience in the MBA program. You'll also want to look at things like quality of the faculty. And one way to gauge that is to get a sense for, are these faculty making media appearances? Are they publishing? What are they known for? What are the departments at the school known for? And do they have faculty to really support your particular area of interest? And that leads me into something like program focus. I think you will see some diversity among US MBA programs when it comes to program focus. For example, Yale SOM is very focused on general management, and many top MBA programs are also focused in that way. Others may have more of an entrepreneurial bent, and that's really the focus of the program. Others may have a specific focus in finance or healthcare. So if you have a particular interest and that's what you'd like to focus your time on in the MBA program, you should seek out MBA programs that have those particular areas of focus. And the other thing I'd like to mention is length. As I mentioned, I'm primarily going to talk about the traditional MBA model in the US, which is 2 years and a full-time program during those 2 academic years. But you will start to see more iterations of what that might look like. You may start to see 1-year MBA programs in the US if you do enough research. And that's probably pretty common in Europe, and it's becoming more common in the US now. So that is an option if that's something that interests you. You may also find things like part-time programs in which you can work and then take programs part-time that would take a longer time to finish, and you would have some travel requirements. That's something else to think about. We also have what you call executive MBA programs. These tend to be very condensed, very intensive programs, usually occurring over weekends, and these tend to be focused on people who are a bit more senior in their careers and maybe have a bit more of a focus on leadership training rather than sort of the foundational pieces of the traditional MBA. So moving into the application timeline, I think that Céline did a great job of laying out sort of the key things to think about in applying for the MBA, but I thought it would be helpful to show you, give you a sort of timeline for how you might want to approach the application process. So generally we say applying to an MBA is really about a 22-month process. What we mean by that is the first year is really about reflection, doing your research, thinking about your particular reasons for going to business school, and really developing a story that you want to tell to business schools. And so the first year is crucial in that it really lays the groundwork for your application year. It really helps you to make the story. It helps you to make connections. It helps you to zero in on the schools that you're planning to apply to. So I really would suggest, if you can, spend a lot of time thinking about and doing your research and really honing your story in that first year. You may start to prepare for the GMAT or the GRE, and I can talk about those pieces in a little bit. But that might straddle year 1 and year 2, depending on when you feel ready to take those exams. And that's when you want to start thinking about draw up your final list of schools that you're applying to. And really do, as Céline suggested, you will want to reach out to schools individually and check their individual application requirements. You may want to check their individual deadlines and things like that, just to make sure you have all of your ducks in a row and you have fulfilled all the requirements needed to apply to the program. And finally, the application process. So taking the time to write your essays, complete your applications, put your resumes together, and I'll go into all of the individual components, but really actually developing your application and submitting your application. These are all pieces that you'll need to think about towards the tail end of that 22 months. So let's go into the MBA application itself. And Céline touched on this, but I thought it would be helpful just to give a little bit more detail on each of these sections. First, every school will require some sort of application form. And a lot of this is really straightforward data, but other pieces will include some short answer questions occasionally. Things like, why are you pursuing an MBA? What is your particular career interest? Things like that. So the application form is very important and will, is a really crucial part of the overall application. You will then submit an academic record, which includes all of the transcripts from your, starting from your undergraduate study. So any college study that you've done, as well as any graduate study that you've undertaken. Most programs will look at graduate study transcripts as well. You will need to submit, in most cases, a GMAT or GRE score. You will need to submit a resume, and I'll talk about that in a minute. In most cases, you will need to submit one or more essays, and this can take the form of a personal statement or an actual essay question or prompt, and I'll talk about that as well. You will need to submit, in most cases, one or two recommendations. And I would suggest that for MBA programs, that you submit professional recommendations, but we can talk about some other options as well. And finally, most MBA programs will require some sort of interview. You should check with the individual school about requirements around the interview, and I'll touch on that as well. So let's start with academics and test scores. And the reason that we spend so much time looking at transcripts and your academic preparation is really because we want you to be successful in the MBA program. And research shows that those who have demonstrated some ability to do well on the quantitative part of their in quantitative courses. So whether it's through courses taken in the undergraduate level or through their standardized tests or both, that gives admissions officers a lot of comfort that you can handle the quantitative rigor of an MBA program. On the GMAT or GRE, one question I get pretty frequently is, assuming a school will accept both exams, and I would say most US programs will now accept one or the other, is there a preference? And generally I say no, there's not a preference. We do accept either. We ask you to take the exam you feel most comfortable taking. We know how to read both exams and take the information that we need from either exam. I would suggest thinking about your future career goals. For example, in the US, if you're interested in doing investment banking recruiting or consulting recruiting, those firms tend to look at GMAT scores when making decisions about whom to interview. So that may be a consideration in choosing which exam to take. Likewise, if you're interested in doing what we call a dual degree, so perhaps you want to do an MBA and a Master of Public Health or something to that degree, those other graduate programs tend to require the GRE exam. So if you are thinking about doing a dual degree, you may wish to take the GRE exam. One thing I suggest is many schools will look at the number of times you've taken the GMAT or GRE, and we would encourage you to take the exam more than once if you feel you can significantly improve your score, or that the score you take the first time is not reflective of your abilities. However, I would say, because we do look at every score, you should consider making sure that you've done everything you can to prepare for the first time that you've taken it. And you really want to make sure that you allow enough time in your schedule as you're thinking about applying to business school to prepare for the exam. And I don't recommend any particular way of studying. I think everyone is different. You should think about your own study habits, your strengths and weaknesses. I recommend to applicants that they take a sample or practice exam of both the GMAT and GRE and see which they feel more comfortable with first before deciding which exam to take. At that point, they, many people are very disciplined and able to create a study schedule and, are able to stick to that on their own and do self-study. And there are a number of books and free materials provided by both ETS, which administers the GRE, and GMAC, which administers the GMAT. So you can certainly pursue a self-developed approach to studying for the exams. However, if you feel like you need the imposed discipline of a more standardized program, test preparation program, others have found that to be very helpful as well. So I would really think about and build into your timeline for application sufficient time to study and sufficient time to pursue the method of studying for the exam you wish to pursue. Okay, moving on to another really crucial part of the application, and this is the resume. And I don't think applicants often understand how important the resume is in an MBA application. And the reason for this is it really gives us, in a very succinct way and very understandable way, a summary of your professional life. So to that end, you really want to think about a few things. We encourage you to keep the resume on the shorter side. I think most US programs will prefer to see a one-page resume. And that means you have to be very selective about what you put on the resume. For example, you will want to highlight achievements rather than just providing a summary of your role. And just to give you an example of what that might mean, rather than summarizing what you do in your different positions since graduating from college, perhaps you want to talk about things that you've achieved. So, for example, through this project, I achieved a 10% reduction in operating expenses for this department. That's a very tangible way of laying out an achievement or impact that you've had on an organization. In addition to that, I would say just some very basic things. You want to keep it very clean and easy to read. You want to make sure that it's one page. Again, this is something that we emphasize to our applicants, and I think most MBA programs would agree to that. That is an expectation of US employers, that there's a one-page resume. So it's a skill set we expect our MBA applicants to have to be able to condense their work experience into one page. If you work for an organization that we may not be familiar with, for example, a non-governmental organization or something to that effect, a parenthetical, very brief description in the resume is completely appropriate. And finally, activities. One question we get a lot is, sort of extracurricular activities, how important are they? Should we include them on the resume? And the answer is yes, but only if they're meaningful and only if they really add to the overall resume and don't take away from pieces that you really could be highlighting. So again, this is something you want to spend a lot of time thinking about. Perhaps show your resume to friends or other advisors who might be able to really help you trim it down and make it as impactful as possible. Moving on to the essay. So the essay is really one part of the application you can control. And what I mean by that is your undergraduate performance has happened. There isn't much you can do about it at this point. Once you take your GRE or GMAT exams, that's done. There's a score. The essay is really your opportunity to craft a story and really tell us who you are in your own unique voice. And so for that reason, I really encourage applicants to think about, what is my what is a contribution I can make to this program? What is unique about my candidacy? What are experiences that I've had that make me a compelling candidate? Keep in mind that admissions officers are often reading thousands of applications. So we're less interested in hearing what you think we want to hear, and more interested in hearing about you and what's unique about you. So just keep that in mind as you are writing your essay. Now, Céline had mentioned that many essay prompts will really be a personal statement. So there won't be a specific question, just a chance to talk about something that's important to you, to really make a statement, a personal statement. In other cases, you may actually have a specific essay question prompt. So what I would encourage you to do is, rather than, many times we see applicants simply cut and paste an essay that they wrote for one school and put it into our application. And I hear this from colleagues at other schools as well. We really are looking for you to answer our specific question. So this is something you should build into your process as well, your timeline. If you're applying to 5 schools, you really want to take the time to write 5 strong essays and really answer the questions that are provided to you. And some schools will ask you to answer more than one question. At Yale, we have 1 essay topic, but other programs may have more. So really build that into your time frame when you're deciding which schools to apply to, and when you're thinking about how to structure your application process. I'm just going to close this section by mentioning that, again, just think about the basics. Make sure that your essay is reading grammatically, that there are no spelling errors. One thing we see pretty often is instead of Yale, there will be another school's name in the essay that someone forgot to remove. So just small things like that make a big impact when we're reading thousands of applications. Recommendations. So this is a really important part of the application for us, because it is an independent assessment of your professional life. So to that end, most MBA programs will require 1 or 2, usually 2, recommendations, and ideally these recommendations, 1 should come from a current supervisor, and both should really come from people who are able to assess your contributions in the workplace. So we find faculty recommendations to be not as helpful. Peer or colleague recommendations are often not helpful. That said, there are situations in which you may need to get those types of recommendations, or get some other types, and I'll talk about that in a second. For example, if you have not yet told the company that you work for that you're applying to business school, you don't want to jeopardize your job. We certainly don't want you to do that, to jeopardize your current position. So in that case, you may not be able to ask your current supervisor to write a letter. In that case, you may wish to find someone else at the company who you feel comfortable asking to write on your behalf. Perhaps there's a vendor or a consultant that you work with that might be able to assist you. Perhaps there's someone in a prior job that you can reach out to. Likewise, if you're in a family business, you may not want to have your mother or father write a recommendation letter. So in that case, you may want to work with a vendor and ask them to assess your performance. In any of those cases, most applications will allow you a chance to write an optional essay or provide optional information. And that's really the place where you can provide some context about why you've chosen the recommenders that you've chosen, if they aren't 2 professional recommendations from your current place of work. Just some additional tips on the recommendations. You do want to provide enough time for your recommender to really write the letter. So generally, we do recommend about 3 months prior to the application deadline that you reach out to the recommenders, you ask them to write a letter on your behalf. Please remember, these are independent assessments of your abilities. So we do suggest not drafting the recommendation for them or providing any sort of, I think it's helpful perhaps to have a conversation with them and talk about accomplishments and things you think they might wish to highlight. But we recommend that people not provide any sort of written bullets or anything like that. that could just be cut and paste by the recommender into a letter. The interview. So again, I mentioned this may vary between schools, the policies here. The interview is really a chance not only for the school to get a better sense for your particular fit with their program, but also really to get a sense for you, how you might fit into the program. So it's just as much informational for you as it is for the person who's assessing your candidacy. And typically, interviews are conducted by students or admissions staff or alumni if you live outside of the country in which you are applying to business school. Interviews can kind of vary between what we call blind and not blind interviews. So blind interviews are those in which the interviewer has only seen your resume or maybe not even that. So they will not have seen what you've written in your essays or things like that. One thing to be aware of is schools have different policies around whether they invite you by invitation only. So you will apply to the program and then you may receive an invitation to interview with the school. Other schools will allow you to schedule your own interviews without invitation. So check with the schools and include that as part of your research process when you're thinking about applying to business school. Again, a few of the basics that I'm just going to highlight, and I know these sound minor, but I feel it's important to mention these because if you do the opposite, these do kind of stick out for interviewers when they write up their assessments. So be on time, dress professionally. I would dress as you would for a standard business interview, and what that means in the US is generally a business suit for both men and women. And come prepared. Make sure that you know your resume. What have you provided? What information have you provided in the resume? Know the school that you're applying to. So ask intelligent questions, not questions that you could easily find on the website. These should be questions that show that you've really engaged and done your research. And finally, follow up. It's always nice to send a thank you email or note to the person that's taken time out to interview you. I'm going to touch briefly on financing the MBA, and cost is an important factor in the MBA decision process, and you did hear Céline speak about some possible options through the Fulbright organization or other types of organizations. But just to give you a sense of what we're really talking about here, most top programs will cost about $60,000 a year in tuition, including living expenses. So you really are looking at maybe $150,000 in total cost, including living expenses, maybe even more than that across the 2 years of business school. Most students will use some combination of their savings and loans to finance their MBA. So you shouldn't apply to business school without having that sort of combination planned and thought about. You certainly can apply for scholarships, and scholarships are available. Many schools will also proactively offer you a scholarship, but you can never really count on that as the means of financing your education. If you're committed to pursuing an MBA in the US, it's always important to think about any loan and savings options you can tap to allow you to pursue this. Another program I just wanted to mention is many schools will provide what is called a loan forgiveness program. And this is typically a program geared towards people who are interested in going into the government or nonprofit social sector areas. And this means if you've taken out loans to finance your MBA education, these loans may be forgiven by your MBA program if you pursue one of these types of employment post-MBA. That typically means you'll receive some sort of reimbursement that you can put towards your loans from the MBA program itself. So those are sort of the key components of applying to the MBA program and financing the program. I know that we have a few minutes left, so I thought if there are any questions, I can see the chat feature. So if you'd like for me to address anything, I'm happy to do that. You can see our contact information here if you would prefer to reach out to me after the webinar to answer any questions. And perhaps Céline would also like to rejoin in case there are questions she can answer as well. The question I hear is some rather standard question, I guess. How important is GMAT GRE scoring in the overall scoring? What GMAT score is Yale School of Management looking for in international students? So that's a good question. I think I'll probably give you a not very satisfying answer, which is I think most MBA programs would tell you that standardized exam is important, but it's not the deciding factor in the MBA admissions process. So we do look at applications as a whole. A particular GMAT score can mean very different things depending on your academic preparation, the type of work that you've done, you know, what your future career goals are. All of those things will sort of mean different things with relation to how we look at your GMAT or GRE score. So what I would suggest is that as you're looking at programs and you're thinking about what your likely score is if you have not yet taken it, it's helpful to look at the ranges of the different programs that you're interested in. And most schools will report the middle 80% range of the scores. And that'll give you a sense for how competitive your application will be in the pool. If you're at the lower end of the range or even outside of the range, then you want to make sure that all the other components of your application are really strong to help make up for the lower standardized test score. In terms of, you know, we don't have any cutoffs. I know we're not specifically talking about Yale SLM today. We're talking more generally about MBA programs. But since you asked a question, we don't have any particular cutoffs with regard to international students or domestic students for that matter. Again, we're looking at each individual application and what the score can tell us in the context of a full application. So I hope that answers your question. What would be a good structure of the essay? What I have tried to introduce previously are shortly my experience, both studies and work, my motivation for the program, and finally what I expect to be doing after the program ends. I think that's a great structure if you have a very open-ended question or simply a prompt that says provide a personal statement. I think that structure makes a lot of sense. Those are the things that most programs are going to ask and try to assess from your application. I will caution you, however, that as I mentioned, many schools have an essay prompt that asks something very specific. For example, Yale's question is, what impact have you had on what positive impact have you had on any organization you've been involved with? And so the structure you're providing wouldn't necessarily sort of fit into answering that question. So I would say, again, you know, as you're doing your research on programs and looking at their applications, make sure you take stock of what the essay would require of you. And, you know, in our case, the structure that you're suggesting may not fit in with the question that we're asking. Do you have MBA programs focused on entrepreneurship? So I don't know if you're asking specifically about Yale. As I mentioned, our MBA is a general management program. You can certainly take elective courses focused on entrepreneurship and get involved in you know, various activities and things like that that would allow you to develop that interest. But our specific programs do not have a focus on that area. That said, there are a number of really strong MBA programs that do have that focus. I know Babson College in Boston has a terrific program that's specifically tailored towards entrepreneurs who are interested in pursuing an MBA. So again, I think looking at you know, what the particular programs that you're interested in have, what areas of focus they have, I think a lot of the full-time programs tend to have more of a general management focus, but as I said, Babson is an entrepreneurial focused program. So, I think doing the research and really asking the schools, as you just did, what's your area of focus or strength, I think is really helpful.
Okay, so I think I will stop the recording now.
Okay.